Blood stained the cobblestones today. Bodies still laid where they had fallen. Not all of them had yet been dragged away on carts covered in canvas, pulled by priests in robes the same crimson shade as the puddles they tracked through. People took care not to appear any farther than the shadows of the alleys. Mothers cradled children to their knees, dead eyes staring at the massacre left behind by the revolt of last night. The sky was heavy and dark, but it was too much to hope that it would rain. Too much to hope that anything could come and cleanse the dark city of the scent of blood. No thunder disturbed the cloud cover. The nimbuses simply hung there, muting the city in a horrible, ringing silence. There might have been a sunrise. It was near impossible to tell. The light barely changed between the night and the day. But the bells were ringing in the temple, their harsh, grating sound clanging across narrow alleys and sagging houses. Morning, it called out, banging out discordant tones like someone pounding on a shield. No sooner had the morning bells finished, their echoes still reverberating in the air, than the second set began. A smaller, more chime-like set. They were poisonous in their sweetness compared to the raucous groan of the morning bells. Beautiful they might be, but they meant one horrible thing. The emperor required the people's presence. They were still dragging bodies clear of the square when the emperor's balcony overlooked. People filtered in slowly, in tiny clumps or one at a time. Thin, haggard, bony people, with dark circles under their eyes and limp hair, skirting around puddles of blood, and giving wide berth to the red-robed priests that moved among them to clear away the last remains of the revolt. Somewhere in the crowd, a loud keen rose up, only to be swiftly shushed by a terrified daughter gripping her mother's hand and trying to keep her from staggering towards a body on the ground. Only the faintest of whispers scattered among the people, tiny clumps of secrets and fears. The balcony remained yet empty. It was a looming thing, all sharp edges, as though hewn from inside of a cave with its jagged stalactites and carved from deepest obsidian. They were edged by torchlight with red, as though they, too, were dripping with blood. Heavy, dull red curtains hung over the entryway, not even stirring with the faintest breeze. Below, past the iron gates that sealed off the inner temple and its courtyard, a faint scuffling sound could be heard. If one was close enough to the iron-wrought gate, they would see 2 red-armored priests hauling their prisoner through the doors, dragging him down the path as he tried to dig his heels in. The gates were pulled open by a red-robed priestess, and the armored priests dragged him into the courtyard, while other priests held the crowd at bay. The prisoner was forced to his knees in the center of the space, his head pulled back to look upwards towards the balcony. Anger twisted his otherwise princely face. His short blonde hair was matted with dirt and grime, face stained with a faint sprinkle of blood. More blood trickled from the corner of his lip, and he threw his shoulder against his captors, only to be held down even more firmly. His presumably once shining white tunic was ripped and stained, blood seeping into the knee from where he was kneeling in the blood. The chimes finally stopped, and the air rung with the silence. Only soft coughs, the shuffle of feet, heavy breaths marred the quiet. The man's chest rose and fell heavily, anger sparkling in his violet eyes. And then the curtains shifted. A tall man emerged first. His robes were the richest of the other priests, long, deep, and velvet, with a golden ribbon that hung off his shoulders, embroidered finely with delicate designs that leached the color from his already sallow skin. He had a pinched sort of face, a narrow nose and eyes, lips that seemed permanently frozen in that of a sneer, blonde hair slicked back so severely that it seemed to yank at the edges of his forehead and pull the skin on his face tight. His eyes briefly swept over the crowd, at the man held prisoner before the balcony. His lips twitched a little at that, a sardonic half-smile briefly tugging at his expression. He was followed by a man only a few inches shorter than him, a pale-skinned youth with eyes the color of a stormy sea, his silver hair neatly arranged down his neck and over his eyes. He dressed in the same fine material as the man beside him, with a silver ribbon instead of gold. However, his expression was far more reserved. He betrayed no spark of emotion as his eyes, too, dropped to the man held kneeling, except to tighten his lips faintly. Then each of them swept to opposite sides of the balcony, and with one arm before them, they bowed. The curtains moved again. The emperor emerged. Compared to the men beside him, he was tiny, dwarfed by both of them. His hair hung limply around his face and between his eyes, a dark green on top and stained with red beneath. His robes were the darkest black, with only faint red embroidery about his waist and sleeves, making him look even paler than he was. He was a round-faced boy, looking no more than 13 or 14. He walked slowly to the edge of the balcony. The railing came up to his chest, making him look even smaller than he was. And yet, no one would look up directly at him. Feet shuffled and hands wrung as the crowd tried to find something, anything, to look at instead of him, to see anything except his unnatural, burning red eyes. He had absolutely no expression as he stared down at the man held prisoner. He might as well have been made of porcelain, with eyes as dead as a doll's. After a few moments of silence, the silver-haired young man finally straightened. He reached into his cloak and withdrew a scroll, flapping it out between his hands so that he could read it. "Jack Atlas," he read aloud, "I, Edo Phoenix, High Priest of the Outer Sanctum, do charge you with treason against our esteemed Emperor and God of Endings." The voice echoed through the silence, as though it were bouncing off the clouds above and spiraling back down among the crowds. "Your crimes include inciting violent revolt, turning hearts against the will of the Empire, and taking up arms against the Zarkanian order for the purposes of the slaughter of the Emperor and those who serve him." Edo furled up the scroll, tucking it back into the sleeves of his robes. In almost perfect sync, the blond man removed his own scroll, opening it and beginning to read aloud. "I, Jean-Michel Roget, High Priest of the Inner Sanctum, remind all present of the punishment for treason," the man said. "Against our God and King, there is no crime more heinous. This day, the leader of the rebellion shall be put to death." He furled up his scroll and replaced it. His eyes flickered to the emperor, lips parting, but all at once Edo spoke. "Repent your crimes," he said, his voice suddenly thick and full of fervor. "Reveal your co-conspirators, and our God will surely have mercy." Roget's lips briefly curled, eyes flashing at Edo, but the silver-haired priest's eyes were fixed on the man below. Jack Atlas did not reply for a long, buzzing moment. Whispers emerged in the edges of the crowd, feet shuffling, robes twitching as priests eyed the suddenly tense crowd. And then Jack Atlas began to laugh. His chest rose and fell with each rocking laugh. Trapped as he was by his captors, he couldn't even move with the laughter that suddenly racked his body. It was an eerie sound that bounced off the walls of the temple and into the crowd, sending up more whispers and hisses. Edo looked taken aback, his lips parting. Finally, Jack stopped laughing, his head flopping to his chest with a broad grin. When he looked up, his eyes were that of a dead man. "He can keep his fucking mercy," he said, voice crackling like lightning up to the balcony. "Calling himself a god and sitting in his fucking palace while the rest of the world rots. He's no god of mine, and no god at all." Barely contained whispers rose and fell among the crowd, pushing at the bubble of silence, and Edo's eyes flashed to the people below with actual surprise. Rajet's jaw clenched. "The Emperor will judge your pathetic soul," he said, the words tumbling out quickly as though he were in some kind of rush. Immediately, everything grew quiet again, as all eyes reluctantly moved back to the Emperor. For his own part, the Emperor had not moved, had not even twitched. It was as though the man below, the crowd, nothing at all held any consequence for him. For a moment, he only stared, red eyes meeting with violet from across the faraway distance. And then, slowly, jerkily, as though his wrists were on strings, he raised one hand up and brought it back down. "The judgment has been made," Edo said, his quiet voice still carrying, "May the next life have mercy on you." It was over quickly. The Emperor did not flinch when the man's throat was cut, either, even as a faint scream rose up from the crowd and harsh whispers began to echo around and grow louder, almost shouts, like another revolt was about to begin. Jack Atlas's body had only barely hit the ground when another voice, loud and clear, rose up over the crowd. "She'll come for you," a woman's voice shrieked. "The goddess's chosen champion, she'll come for you, you miserable wretch, and end your miserable reign." Only then did something change. All at once, the Emperor's face seemed to clench up. His eyes widened imperceptibly, his breath catching and fingers twitching. Something like shock, surprise, fluttered over his face, made him seize up ever so slightly. Edo's robes fluttered as he almost instinctively stepped forward, beckoning the Emperor away from the railings without touching him as the crowd began to boil. The crowd bubbled around the priests that tried to hold them back, one or two of them trying to steal close enough to get to the body in the middle. "She's coming!" the woman continued to shriek. "She's coming, you miserable bastard!" Edo hurriedly guided the Emperor back to Rajet, arm hovering just behind his back without actually touching him. "I'll take care of this. Please get His Majesty to safety," Edo said. "Of course," Roger said. "Your Grace, please come with me." Rajet put one arm behind him, again without touching him, and hurried him back through the curtains and into the darkness of the temple within. The Emperor tried to look back, just once, to the roiling crowd. "There's a goddess," rang through his head. "There's really a goddess." His breath caught again. "She can finally kill me."